My beloved friends, today I want to speak to your heart, to that place within you where dreams have been delayed, prayers have seemed unanswered, and faith has been tested by financial storms. You may have walked through seasons where it felt like the heavens were silent, where every effort seemed to fall short. But hear me clearly, God has not forgotten you. God is not blind to your faith. Every time you believed when everything inside you screamed to give up, heaven noticed. Every tear that fell from your eyes in secret became a testimony before the throne of God. You may have thought no one was watching when you whispered a prayer in the middle of the night, but the one who neither sleeps nor slumbers heard every word. Your faith is not a wasted act of hope. It is a divine signal that reaches the heart of your Creator. Faith speaks louder in silence than the loudest shout of fear. It is the invisible proof that you still trust His promise, even when His plan is hidden. Many people think God responds to need, but that is not entirely true. The world is full of need, yet heaven moves in response to faith. Faith is the currency of the kingdom of God. Just as money gives you access to earthly goods, faith gives you access to heavenly treasures. When God sees faith, He recognizes someone who still believes that His word is true, no matter how dark the situation appears. When He finds that kind of faith, He cannot remain still. Faith draws His attention, commands His compassion, and activates His power. You may have given, served, and prayed without seeing results. You may have wondered, has God forgotten me? But I want to tell you, He has not. He saw your sacrifice when you helped someone else while you yourself were in need. He saw you keep tithing when your bank account was nearly empty. He saw you smile and encourage others while you carried your own silent pain. Heaven records every act of faithfulness. The Bible says the eyes of the Lord search throughout the earth to show Himself strong to those whose hearts are loyal to Him. That means God is actively looking for believers who will keep trusting Him despite delay. You are one of them. You may not feel seen by people, but you are known deeply by God. Faith that pleases God is not loud, flashy, or showy. It is quiet, consistent, and persistent. It is the faith that keeps walking, even when the road disappears beneath your feet. Think of a farmer who plants seed into the ground. Once he covers it with soil, it seems to vanish. But he doesn't dig it up every morning to check if it is growing. He simply waters it and waits. The farmer knows something powerful is happening underground, even though his eyes can't see it. That is what faith looks like. You may not see the answer yet, but God is working in the unseen realm, preparing the harvest that will come in due season. Let me give you a simple example. A woman once owned a small bakery in a struggling neighborhood. For months, her business barely survived. Some days she sold only a few loaves of bread. Her friends told her to close the shop, but she said, "No, God gave me this place, and He will bless it." Each morning she prayed over her ovens and thanked God for provision before a single customer arrived. One evening, a delivery truck broke down right in front of her bakery. The driver, frustrated and hungry, came inside to buy food. He turned out to be the supply manager for a large supermarket chain. He tasted her bread and loved it so much that he offered her a contract to supply bread to several stores. Overnight, her small shop became a thriving business. People called it luck, but she knew it was divine timing. God had seen her faith long before the opportunity arrived. That's how God works. He watches your heart when no one else does. He notes your faith when others ignore your struggle. The moment your faith matures through endurance, He releases the blessing prepared for you. So do not despise the hidden seasons. They are proving grounds for miracles. You may feel invisible, but you are standing in the spotlight of God's attention. Keep believing, keep sowing, keep praying, and keep trusting. The eyes of heaven are upon you, and your faith will soon speak louder than your circumstance. God is not blind to your faith. He is preparing to reward it in ways you cannot yet imagine. Financial breakthrough begins in the invisible. Every great blessing that appears in the physical world first takes root in the unseen realm of faith. Before money arrives, before doors open, before opportunity manifests, something begins to shift in your spirit. Many people are waiting for visible results before they believe, but true faith believes before it sees. The invisible world is the birthplace of every visible miracle. When you learn to see with the eyes of faith, you begin to attract what heaven has already prepared for you. So often, we want God to change our situation before He changes us. But that's not how His kingdom works. God starts by transforming your mindset, your attitude, your words, and your expectations. You cannot walk into abundance with a spirit of scarcity. You cannot receive increase while your heart is full of doubt and fear. God first teaches you to think like a steward of abundance, to believe that you are a child of a generous Father. When that transformation happens in your heart, the external change becomes inevitable. The condition of your inner life determines the level of your outer blessing. Faith is the unseen substance that gives birth to the visible. When you pray for financial increase, heaven begins to move, but that movement is not always visible right away. Angels begin to arrange divine connections, align opportunities, and open unseen pathways. You might not feel anything changing, but the invisible is already in motion. That's why patience and praise are powerful. Praise in the invisible season is proof that you truly trust God. When you thank Him before the breakthrough, you prove that your confidence is not in circumstances but in His character. This is why Jesus said that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. The mustard seed is tiny, hidden, and almost invisible when it's planted. But within that small seed lies explosive potential. You can't see the growth happening underground, but over time, the roots dig deep and the tree begins to rise. The process of increase always begins in secret, underground, unseen, and unnoticed. That's how faith works. Your prayers, your confessions, your giving, and your faith-filled declarations are all seeds planted in the soil of the invisible. There are people who give up too soon because they don't see immediate change. They stop praying, stop giving, and stop believing. But the invisible realm doesn't respond to impatience. It responds to consistency. Just as a seed needs time to germinate before it breaks through the surface, your faith needs time to mature before the results appear. God's delays are not His denials. The moment you pray in faith, the answer begins to form, but it is being shaped and strengthened behind the scenes. Let me share a short example that shows this truth clearly. A man once dreamed of starting his own business, but he had no money and no connections. Still, he prayed every morning, saying, "Lord, thank you for the company you are building through me." Every day, he wrote down business ideas, drew logos, and acted as if his company already existed. For months, nothing seemed to happen. His friends laughed, saying, "You're wasting time on an invisible dream." But he kept believing, working, and thanking God. One afternoon, while helping a friend at a local event, he met a business investor who asked about his ideas. The investor was so impressed that he funded his startup completely. Within a year, the company that once existed only in his imagination became a thriving reality. What was invisible became visible because faith kept working even when nothing seemed to move. That's what happens when you believe in the invisible. Faith paints pictures in your heart long before your eyes can see them. It creates vision, expectation, and momentum. The more you meditate on God's promises, the more you align yourself with His divine provision. Remember, you cannot attract what you do not believe exists. So begin to see your financial breakthrough in the Spirit before it arrives in your bank account. Speak it. Thank God for it, and act as though it is already done. The invisible is not empty, it's alive with God's creative power. Financial breakthrough does not start when you receive a check, a job, or a promotion. It begins the moment your heart believes that God is your source. Once that realization takes root in your spirit, you walk differently, think differently, and give differently. The invisible becomes the foundation of your visible blessing. So hold your faith firm, even when your hands are empty, because the invisible world is working for you. Your seed of faith is already growing underground, and in God's perfect time, it will rise visible, abundant, and overflowing. Your obedience unlocks provision. In the kingdom of God, blessing is always connected to obedience. You can pray, fast, and declare all the right words, But if your life is not aligned with what God has told you to do, the flow of His provision will remain blocked. Obedience is not about rules or religion, it is about relationship and trust. It is the act of saying, God, I believe your way is higher than mine. When you obey, even when you don't understand, you give God permission to release what He has already prepared for you. The miracle is rarely waiting for God to act. More often, it is waiting for you to obey. In Scripture, every story of supernatural provision began with someone following an instruction that didn't make sense. God told Noah to build an ark when it had never rained. He told Abraham to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. He told Peter to cast his net on the other side of the boat after fishing all night and catching nothing. These commands were not logical, but obedience is not about logic, it is about faith. Logic deals with what you can see. Faith responds to what God says. When you move in obedience, even when your mind doesn't understand, you step into the current of divine supply. Many people pray for provision but refuse to take the step God has placed before them. They wait for the resources before they act. But in God's system, obedience comes before supply. When the widow of Zarephath obeyed the prophet Elijah and gave him her last bit of flour and oil, her jar never ran empty during the famine. When she acted on the word, heaven multiplied her small offering into supernatural abundance. Had she waited until she had enough, she would have missed the miracle. That is the mystery of obedience. It turns what is little into more than enough. Obedience also reveals the depth of your trust in God. It's easy to obey when the path is clear. But the real test comes when God asks you to do something uncomfortable, costly, or uncertain. That's when your heart is exposed. Do you trust God enough to obey even when it stretches you? The greater the obedience, the greater the release. God can only multiply what you surrender. When you give Him control, He gives you overflow. Sometimes the instruction God gives you seems unrelated to the breakthrough you're praying for. He may ask you to forgive someone, to give to a cause, to start something new, or to stop something harmful. You may think, what does this have to do with my finances? But remember, God sees the whole picture. Your obedience in one area can unlock provision in another. God blesses those who are aligned with His will, not just those who ask for blessings. Provision is the natural outcome of walking in divine order. Let me give you an example. A young man once dreamed of owning a construction company, but he worked a small, underpaid job at a local firm. One day, God placed in his heart a simple instruction: honor your boss, serve him faithfully as if you were serving me. The man decided to obey. He began arriving early, working with integrity, and blessing his boss through prayer, even when he was overlooked for promotion. After 2 years, the company's owner unexpectedly decided to retire. Instead of selling the business to an outsider, he called this young man into his office and said, "I've watched your faithfulness. You're the one who should lead this company." He handed the business over at a fraction of its worth. The man later said, "It wasn't my talent or strategy, it was obedience to God's small instruction that opened the door." That's how the kingdom works. God often tests you with small instructions before He trusts you with great provision. If you cannot obey with a little, you won't handle much. But when He sees your obedience in the small things, He releases abundance beyond what you can contain. So, if you are praying for financial breakthrough, stop asking only for money and start asking, "Lord, what are you asking me to do?" The instruction you obey today may be the key that unlocks your tomorrow. God's provision is not limited by economy, timing, or location. It is limited only by disobedience. The moment you decide to obey, heaven begins to move. Your obedience is the bridge between promise and provision, between lack and overflow. Walk in it faithfully, and you will see that obedience truly unlocks the blessings of God. God is positioning you for divine favor. Sometimes the path to blessing does not look like a straight road. It winds through uncertainty, change, and even discomfort. You may not understand why certain doors closed, why some relationships ended, or why life seems to be taking you in a direction you never planned. But what feels like confusion is often divine positioning. God is not punishing you, He is preparing you. The places He takes you, the people He introduces you to, And even the challenges He allows are all working together to position you for something far greater than you can imagine. Divine favor is not random, it is purposeful. Before God releases it, He arranges the environment where that favor can manifest. Think of it like a chess game. Every move has a reason, even when you can't see the strategy. God moves you from one season to another, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly, but always intentionally. You might lose a job only to discover your calling. You might move to a new city and meet the person who changes your life. You might face rejection only to be redirected to divine opportunity. When your life seems to be shifting unexpectedly, it's not chaos, it's choreography. Heaven is aligning you with your destiny. God's positioning is often disguised as inconvenience. The road to divine favor is rarely comfortable because favor requires maturity. Before you can handle what God is about to give you, He develops the character that can carry the blessing. The waiting season is not wasted. It is where God molds your heart, strengthens your faith, and teaches you dependence on Him rather than your own strength. Many people miss divine favor because they resist divine positioning. They try to stay in familiar places when God is calling them to step out. But if you stay stuck in what is comfortable, you'll never step into what is supernatural. When God is preparing to bless you, He sometimes removes what you think you need. That's why people walk away. Opportunities dry up and doors close. It's not rejection, it's redirection. God will never take something from you unless He intends to replace it with something better. His ways are higher than ours, and His timing is perfect. What looks like loss is often the setup for increase. When Joseph was sold into slavery, it looked like tragedy. But every step from the pit to Potiphar's house to prison was divine positioning for the palace. Had Joseph not been rejected by his brothers, he would never have become the ruler of Egypt. What others meant for evil, God used for good. Here's a short example that brings this truth to life. A woman worked for years at a company where she felt secure and respected. One day, out of nowhere, the company downsized and she lost her job. She was devastated and confused. She prayed, asking God why He had allowed this to happen when she had been faithful. For several months, she searched for work with no success. Then one day, she attended a community seminar just to pass the time. There, she met a man who owned a small publishing firm. He mentioned they were looking for a project manager, and she decided to apply. She got the job, and within a year, she was promoted to partner. Looking back, she realized that if she had not lost her previous job, she never would have attended that seminar or met the person who opened the door to her destiny. What she once saw as a setback was actually God's setup. That's how divine positioning works. When you walk with God, there are no accidents. Every detour, every disappointment, every delay has purpose. Even when you can't trace His hand, you can trust His heart. He knows exactly where you need to be and when you need to be there. Favor is location sensitive. It falls where God places you. That's why obedience matters. You can't experience divine favor while standing in disobedience. When God says move, move. When He says wait, wait. Your willingness to follow His direction determines how fully you experience His favor. So if you are in a season that feels uncertain, don't panic. Heaven is not confused. The same God who guided Joseph from the pit to the palace, who led Ruth from Moab to Boaz, who took David from the pasture to the throne, is guiding you too. Trust that every closed door is making room for a better one. Keep your heart right, your faith steady, and your spirit open. You are not stuck, you are being strategically positioned. And when the time is right, God will reveal why every step was necessary. The season of shifting is not your end. It's the beginning of divine favor. Don't give up before the miracle. The most dangerous moment in your journey of faith is often the one right before the breakthrough arrives. It's the season when everything seems silent, prayers feel unanswered, and strength begins to fade. This is the point where many people quit just before God's promise is about to be fulfilled. But if you could see what heaven is preparing behind the scenes, you would never stop believing. Every great victory is born in the tension between faith and frustration. The enemy cannot stop what God has planned for you. So he tries to make you stop believing in it. The pressure you feel right now is not a sign of defeat. It's the evidence that your miracle is near. Faith is not proven when everything is easy. It's proven when everything is silent. Anyone can praise when doors are opening, but true faith praises when nothing is moving. The moment you decide to keep believing, even when you see no results, you prove that your trust is not in circumstances, it's in God's character. Waiting seasons are not wasted seasons. They are divine classrooms where God teaches endurance, patience, and trust. Sometimes He delays the visible answer to deepen your spiritual roots. He wants you to have faith strong enough to hold the weight of the blessing that's coming. When things seem to get worse instead of better, don't mistake that for God's absence. Often, the darkness grows heavier right before the dawn. You may feel like your prayers are hitting a wall, but they are actually shaking the walls of your breakthrough. Think of a seed planted in the soil, it disappears for a while. You can't see what's happening beneath the ground, but deep inside, something is breaking open, roots are forming, and life is preparing to push through. If the farmer stopped watering the seed just because he saw no growth, the harvest would die underground. That's what happens when people give up too soon. Their miracle was already growing, but they walked away before it surfaced. In your most discouraging moments, remember that faith is not a feeling, it's a decision. You choose to keep walking, keep praying, and keep expecting, even when emotions say otherwise. God honors persistence. The widow in the parable who kept knocking on the judge's door didn't give up, and because of her persistence, she received justice. That's how faith works. It keeps knocking until heaven opens. God doesn't ignore your prayers. He times them perfectly. What you think is delay is actually preparation. Let me share a short example that shows this truth beautifully. A man once dreamed of building a school in a poor village. For years, he worked hard, saved money, and prayed constantly. But every time he was close to starting, something went wrong. His savings would run out, partners would back out, or government permits would delay. After 10 years of disappointment, he sat one evening ready to give up. That night, he told God, "Maybe this was never your plan." But something inside whispered, "Hold on a little longer." The next morning, he received a call from an organization that had heard about his vision. They offered to fund the entire project and even expand it beyond what he imagined. Within months, the school was built. Later, he said, "I almost quit one day before my miracle." That's how close many people are to their breakthrough. One more prayer, one more step, one more day of faith. The key is to keep going when quitting feels easier. Every great testimony once stood on the edge of giving up. The heroes of faith, Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, all endured seasons of waiting and doubt, but they held on. Abraham waited decades for his promised son. Joseph spent years in prison before he saw the palace. David ran from danger long before he sat on the throne. Their faith wasn't quick, but it was consistent. They didn't give up before the miracle, and neither should you. Right now, even if everything looks impossible, God is still working. Your prayers have not been ignored. They have been gathered. Your faith has not been wasted. It has been tested. Every tear, every trial, every act of obedience has built a bridge toward your breakthrough. Don't stop walking until you cross it. The moment you feel like giving up is often the moment you're closest to victory. Keep believing, keep standing, and keep expecting. The miracle that seems delayed is already on its way, and when it arrives, you'll understand why God made you wait. The waiting will make the miracle even sweeter, so hold on in faith. The story isn't over yet. Beloved, your faith has been tested, and God has seen it. Your season of lack is not permanent. Heaven is releasing resources, favor, and open doors you did not even imagine.